Hi, you're very welcome to the podcast. My name is Anita Bourne and I'm the founder of the Femcast, a podcast and website driven by a passion for empowering women and promoting gender equality. Through the Femcast, we are making it our mission to educate, empower, and encourage women to harness the power of their voices, share their stories, and raise awareness of the crucial issues affecting women today. By amplifying women's voices, the Femcast aims to strengthen women's rights and celebrate the achievements of women everywhere. We are passionate about making a positive impact through storytelling, advocacy, and creating a supportive community to act as an inspiration to others who aspire to effect change. Come visit our website, www.thefemcast.com, for more information on what we do and resources to help you. In this episode, Dr. Jen Fraser and I focus on the interplay between science and the profound social challenges that plague our world and the societal issues we face today. Rather than viewing them solely as moral quandaries, we are encouraged to examine them through the lens of science as we witness a concerning surge in bullying, femicide, and destructive behaviours among the younger generation. The root cause lies in our failure to apply scientific principles to nurture our youth effectively. The heart of the matter lies in fostering deep connections among our youth and understanding the mechanics of our stress response system, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which holds the key to tranquility, empathy, and respect. Society's programming has led us down a path of destruction, but we can change that.
Hi, Jen. You're very welcome. How are you today?
I'm great, Anita. Thanks so much for chatting with me again. I love our conversations.
Yes. And so this is the 8th episode on the Bully Brain, and we're going back into the neuroscience today. And as we say, we need to go upstream. We need to get to the root of the problem and start helping from there. We are going in to talk about femicide. We are talking about children going back to school, how we can help their brains. We're talking about peers in the workplace. We'll be talking about them as well. And you're going to go into the animal nation and talk about the science and give people a better understanding of what is happening in our brains, how we have the science there, how we have done all this research back as far as the 80s, and we're still where we are.
Yeah, so let's start with animals. It's a really interesting topic. And if everyone listening can just think about these horrible situations in our society, the violence, the bullying, the hurt, the harm, the suffering on all sides, if they can stop thinking about it just for now as a moral problem and instead think about it as a scientific problem. So let's all pretend that we're scientists and we're studying this phenomenon. And we could even say to ourselves, well, let's study this phenomenon as if it was an animal population, because human beings we're animal creatures, basically. So we can learn a lot by studying animals and what's going on in their brains and bodies and learn a ton about ourselves. So this is a story that I read in a brilliant economic book called The Empathic Civilization by Jeremy Rifkin. He's a brilliant economist. And he tells the story of an elephant population in Africa. And it was part of a zoo. And it was a place where there were scientists studying the animals as well as people could visit and so on. So there's this herd of animals, and the scientists and the zoologists were completely thrown off. They'd never seen anything like it before because young male elephants, adolescent elephants, the males, were bullying other animals, attacking them, interfering with them, threatening them, and they got to the point where they started killing other animals. And so the zoologists were just like, what? We've never seen this before. What is going on? This is unnatural behavior. Just like it's unnatural behavior in humans. But we've normalized it. We normalize these kinds of behaviors rather than put a scientific lens on it and go, okay, we clearly have to do something. There's something wrong here. So one of the zoologists said, look, this probably isn't related, but it's the only thing I can think of. Remember 2 or 3 years ago, we culled the older male elephants out of the herd because we just didn't have enough space in the game reserve. And everyone else was like, wow, maybe, yeah. I mean, it's worth a try. We don't have any other answers. So they brought the male elephants back that were associated like they were the ancestors essentially of these young adolescent male elephants. Within 2 weeks, the young elephants were completely in line, not bullying, not harming, and not killing any other animals. They were completely, taught in a 2-week span by their elders how to conduct themselves properly, how to self-regulate, and how to interact with other beings in the space. Now, why can't we do that with humans?
Oh my God, that is just incredible, isn't it? When the elders come back into the village with their wisdom and their lived experience. Well, I know we're talking about elephants. It's just incredible. And then they teach the younger ones coming up. But where would they have learned this behavior? Or they just didn't have guidance?
I think it's a double-sided answer, and it's the key question. Why are they behaving that way? Because they're threatened. Young females and males will behave with a stress response, fight, which is what they were doing. Young males is more tendency towards that. Fight, flight, run away, or freeze, paralyze. We know this in science. This is the sympathetic stress response. It is a brain body response. It's unconscious. It pumps our bodies full of adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormone, and it's designed absolutely brilliantly to save our lives. Those young male elephants, just like young humans, males, are going out into the world and harming because they are operating on an unconscious, impulsive default system that they can't control and they don't understand. How about if we, first of all, remove the threats against them with the elders? So that means we created a society where they did not feel massively stressed out. Think of the stresses on young women and men today. There are massive environmental stresses. They're watching their world be torn apart by their elders. There are massive economic stressors on them. No one can afford childcare. No one can afford gas. No one can afford food on the table, let alone a shelter. I mean, come on, the generation coming up, no joke, we're seeing a rise in bullying, a rise in femicide, a rise in all kinds of destructive human things because we're not using science to care for our young in such a way. We are using things like greed. We're using things like, I don't care if I destroy the environment as long as I get my billions of dollars. I mean, the elders are the ones that are lost. And then they turn and look at these young people. Oh, I guess we have to create a bigger prison. Really? Why don't we care for our young better as a society? We need our young men and women to be growing up together, totally connected, and all the other gender expressions in between, of course. I'm just for shorthand saying male, female. We need to teach them how to understand their stress response system, how to activate the parasympathetic system, like the elders did with the elephants. They said to them, hey, we're here to protect you. We're going to teach you how to calm down. We're going to teach you how to self-regulate. We're going to get your stress response levels way down so you can be calm and empathic and respectful of the other creatures in the game reserve. And it took 2 weeks and they did it. It takes longer with humans. We've been heavily programmed to behave in very destructive ways through our society. So it's going to take longer. It's not a quick fix, but it absolutely can be done.
Do you think if elephants can self-regulate, if we teach kids younger from kindergarten up, you know, where they say, oh, the terrible twos, terrible threes, you know, the tantrums, that's because they don't have words and they can't articulate what they need and how they feel. So this is how they react. And putting them and isolating them in a corner isn't the answer. So if we taught them early, can you explain to the listeners how you could self-regulate?
Well, I mean, first of all, as we know with kids, the adults have to self-regulate first. So if the adult witnessing a child having a temper tantrum, if they ramp up their anxiety, and they do, I mean, it's hard not to when a child is acting this way,
Acting out.
it causes anxiety, it causes stress. So you go into your stress response system yourself. If you don't know how to regulate, you're not going to be in a very good position to help this little person who's overwhelmed by stress, basically an emotional overwhelm, and is probably feeling panicked and afraid and frustrated. And the key thing you said, Anita, as we've talked about before, there's no language. One of the most empowering things you can do for a little one all the way up to our most elder person on the planet is teach them a rich vocabulary in order to interpret the emotion constructs that are happening within their body and their brain. So just to give a quick example. So we teach kids, oh, you have an anxiety disorder. And we say to them over and over again, you have anxiety, you have anxiety, you have anxiety. You're depressed, you're depressed, you're depressed. That's not at all helpful. What we want to be doing is saying, okay, let's teach you a whole range of words to help you understand the different feelings that are arising from your brain and body. Maybe you feel nervous. Maybe you feel challenged by this test or task or something that's coming up. Maybe you're feeling fear. Well, that's quite reasonable considering the situation. Or maybe you're feeling fearful and your brain's not correcting. It's really good, the brain, at correcting errors. We see a stick and we think it's a snake, our brain will quickly correct that. Or we burned our hand on the stove. And so our brain makes us leap back when we see a stove, and then it quickly corrects the error. The stove's not on. So, we have this constant mechanism happening in our brains when we're starting to get really off, like depressed, let's say. It's because the error prediction's not working properly and we can fix it. So, how do we teach adults to self regulate so that they can be way more helpful to a little one that actually, as you say, they don't need to be punished? They're not doing a morally reprehensible thing. Why would we add to their stress levels? What they need is a very well regulated adult who cares and comforts and creates safety around them, and is with them in this moment and shares the frustration, tries to learn how to alleviate it, what's going on. That adult needs to be using fitness is one of our best ways to learn self regulation, super helpful for the brain, reduces stress, and prevents the noxious kinds of harm that stress can do to brain and body. So, aerobic exercise, whatever you want, dance every day, walk super fast, go water skiing, jump on your bike, whatever you do, get out with your friends and hike. Everything social and exercise wise that you do out in nature, especially, fabulous for self regulation. Mindfulness is fabulous for self regulation. And then we should be teaching kids and adults, because many of the adults haven't learned it, but we start with the little ones and then build a whole generation of people that instead of feeling an impulse to bully, they're highly trained in their empathy. So we teach them, oh, you see a child having a temper tantrum? Stop worrying about what other people think. Get down on the ground. Be empathic. Try and tap into what it feels like to be a child who's sobbing and yelling. Like, get into the mindset, walk a mile in that kid's shoes. What's going on and how can you help? Next stage being compassion. These are the key things that our education system should be spending every single day on. These are the
Yeah,
things that need a lot of our social tragedies right now.
absolutely. And I know it's not easy for parents. They have 1,001 things going on in a 24-hour day, and 8 of those are spent, you'd hope they're getting sleep and replenishing, energy, rest for the body. And but some of them obviously aren't getting that either, because they still have children calling into the bedroom at night, and with different little things. Um, Whereas if we had an approach where they go into school, that would help everybody so much, and a value system, and shake hands with the person beside you in the morning, ask them how they are. It's just good, and it's good for social and making eye contact, because they're in front of screens a lot as well.
Oh, the screens. One of the things that I think is really important for educators and for parents in government to understand is that we have constructed an education system that still operates as if academics and arts and sports are the greatest predictor of success. So, and happiness. So we pour all our resources into those things and we make children's days far, far, far too long by hammering in these things: arts, sports, and academics. And what the science shows is that the greatest predictor of a happy and successful life is self regulation. So we should be teaching kids from an early age, okay, how do you self regulate? How do you manage the seesaw of your threat response system, your stress response system, fight, flight, freeze? How do you navigate that and be very empowered to activate when you need it? Your parasympathetic nervous system, which is rest, the scientists call it rest and digest. That's where health lies. That's where being a brilliant boss lies. That's where succeeding wherever you want, sports, arts, or academics in the workplace. That's where it all happens. That's where you have colleagues that love you. That's where you have satisfaction and you live till a great long age, as all the science shows. Why? Because you have purpose, you have community, you have exercise, all these things. It's not rocket science. It's actually very basic. And we are not doing those things. We've got our kids on screens all day long. It's madness.
Oh, wouldn't that be so beautiful, that the kids knew how to regulate themselves. They were happy and content. They're not competitive. They're helping the next person. They leave no one behind from a young age all the way up into the universities, into the workplace, into the relationships, into the next generation coming up behind them that they have. How gorgeous would that be if they knew how
Well,
to regulate themselves and they spent the day doing that and realizing if I'm really content in myself. And imagine all the hospital beds that you'd free up there. People wouldn't be sick. Well, pharmaceuticals wouldn't be happy, but the, the rest of the population would.
well, and think of how we'd free up so many, like a prison is the most
Prison
outdated.
especially.
It's the most outdated thing on the planet. One of the statistics that I'm sure you and I talked about, but I always bring it up because it really makes an impact on people. And it's in the introduction to my book, which is that 70% of prisoners, 70% of prisoners in the California system were in foster care. Are
That's
they bad
incredibly
people?
sad.
It's incredibly sad. Are they bad people? No. But you got to ask the question, why did two people get married, have children, and have no idea how to care for one another in this contract we refer to with the old fashioned term marriage? Why don't they know how to properly fulfill a contract that they signed and then properly raise children that have, you know, no fault of their own, no decision making on their part? They are fully and completely your fiduciary responsibility. How is it that we have young people that bring this into the world when it is just a train wreck for 50% of them and it ruins their lives? Why don't we teach in school, hey, you guys need to learn all about marriage and all the financial implications of marriage, the legal implications of marriage. We're going to teach you about what happens during divorce. We're going to teach you about custody for children. We're going to teach you everything about it because it will be the biggest mistake that you make if you marry the wrong person. And 50% of you guys are going to do that. And it's going to tear your life apart. And it's really going to hurt the next generation as you tear your own lives apart and it really impacts your kids. We know it's really serious. So we're going to teach you. We're going to teach you how to make a really great decision. We're going to teach you all about the finances of it too. Why are we doing that? Did I need to know chemistry in high school? No. Did I have to spend lots of time on it? Yes. Did I need math? Nope. I was going into comparative literature. I didn't need to spend time on any of those things. They didn't help me one tiny bit in my life. Not at all. I would have loved to have had a course on finance and parenting and marriage. Those are the big things that are going to cause the issues. Why don't we teach it?
Exactly. Isn't it incredible that we don't teach it, but we filled our heads with fairy tales? And I don't know, Snow White being woken by a prince, Cinderella being saved by another prince. If only that did happen.
Well, I mean, one of the funniest things to look at in human society is how people pour money, resources, energy, imagination, huge amounts of time into their wedding day.
Oh yeah.
If we got them to pour all that energy and resources into understanding how marriage works, understanding what domestic violence is, understanding how it happens, what to do when it happens, that they're going to develop learned helplessness, or as the scientists say, a perception of inescapability, so that they will stay with this individual even though they know that their life is at risk, and even have children with this individual. Individuals, obviously, completely mentally ill, nobody's getting them any medical help. No one's looking at their brain and why it's so distorted and dysfunctional. And no one is helping them to medically regulate, become healthy so that they're not hurting someone behind closed doors in their home. It's incredible. And my laugh and smiling is just such a sense of disbelief that it almost makes me feel like laughing. It's so crazy. But
Yeah.
21st century humanity, talk about an animal population that is run amok. It's crazy.
Can we go back to more on the animals and the science there at that what us humans can learn from the animals? Like if an elephant can self-regulate, we can self-regulate ourselves and help the children. And can we go back to the other animals as well? Because people don't realize how quickly you can, not how quickly you can turn it around. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience and it does take consistency and you have to be committed to it. But how we can help them.
Well, let's just look super fast at some of the most famous animal experiments that can teach all of us in a flash, just you and me talking right now, how much difference it could make in the lives of adults and children. Like we should be teaching all kids these animal experiments, what happened. One of the, well, they're all awful actually because the animals suffer so much, but it is the way that science learns really important things, not that we apply it to human populations. We just allow it to continue on in this destructive way. But the Harlow experiment was on monkeys, and the monkeys were separated from their mothers and they were given substitute mothers. They were given like constructed metal things. Sometimes
Oh,
it had
yeah.
sometimes. So these little monkeys, they were given food. They had shelter. We've all been taught Maslow's hierarchy. Oh, higher level needs and so on. But first we have to have food and shelter. Not true from a brain point of view. The brain needs love. The brain depends literally on the love of a caring mother figure, whether that's a grandparent or an elder or a dad or a nanny, whatever. They need love. And that's the only way their brain develops healthily. These little monkeys that were separated from their mothers manifested all kinds of destructive behaviors that we see in humanity. They suffered extreme anxiety, they suffered extreme depression, and they enacted violence against their little ones. Just all the things that we see human populations doing. And we look at it and go, oh, this is a terrible thing. Let's treat it as a moral failing. These people have awful characters. We used animalistic names for their monsters. We're going to put them away in prison just like you do with the toddler having the temper tantrum. Oh, you're going to get a timeout. We're going to put you away if you can't self-regulate, but we're not going to teach you how to do it. I mean, so Harlow experiment tells us right now, one of the most important things, if you are going to bring a child into this world, you should be signing a contract that says you've been highly educated and highly certified and done your work to be a healthy human that has the right now to bring a child into the world. I'm making it sound so regulated and kind of oppressive. I don't mean it that way. I mean it like, it's just such an important thing, but we don't teach people how to do it or how to bring themselves to health before they do it. But we should be teaching that, and they should be getting certifications to, just like we do in professions. You should just have to have these kinds of knowledges and be your best self if you really do want to have a child and bring it into the world and understand what that means. 20 years of consistent care. Do you really have what's within you do you really want to do that? You've got to think it through. It just should be taught. It should be part of our education system. And so that's the Harlow experiment. Another one, this is the one where perception of inescapability or learned helplessness was discovered.
Can you explain that to the listeners again? They may not have heard a couple of episodes ago when we talked about learned helplessness.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just a quick one. It was done on German Shepherds. They were in cages and they were given electrical shocks. And they became so demoralized and so beaten down and so terrified that when the cage was opened ultimately and they were told they were free to go, they could go back and live joyful, happy lives. So think of a individual who's in a domestic abuse
Mm-hmm.
situation. They come to believe that they can't escape.
Mm-hmm.
And so they stay and they stay and they cower and they think it's going to be better tomorrow. And they believe all kinds of things. They believe that they become helpless, that they cannot escape. This happens in animal populations. Humans are animal creatures. We all also come to believe that there's no escape. Think of people who stay in the workplace with bullies
Yes.
and abusive bosses or sexual harassment or all of these horrible things that happen. They come to believe that they're helpless and they can't escape. That's a famous experiment as well. Another very famous experiment, this is on human animals. It was done in the 1960s and it's been replicated multiple times with the same results. So we've made no change since the 1960s. And this experiment was done because the scientists were trying to figure out how the Holocaust could have happened. How is it possible that a million normal individuals, a million German people, regular people, neighbors to Jewish and other people that they sent to the gas chambers, how did they become people that sent their neighbors and children and women and innocent individuals, and mostly Jewish, how did that happen? This is what the scientific question was. Well, what they learned is we train children in our school system not to be critical thinkers, not to be independent thinkers, not to be compassionate, not to be empathic, not to self regulate, not to understand how their brain works. not to understand that their brain is the captain of their ship and they have to work with it because it rules everything they do in their life, and not the self-regulation is going to bring them the greatest success and happiness. We don't teach those things. We teach children how to obey. We
Yeah.
teach them not to think, to be completely compliant to the adults that are in power, and to respect them, and to not even have language concepts for what adults might be doing that is abusive. We hand children over to abusive adults on a silver platter because we're too afraid to talk about it. So, our education system is what produces people today, like it did in World War II. We are producing citizens that cannot think for themselves. If you look at the Trump trial, it's been really interesting with the insurrection on January 6th, where the Capitol was stormed and it was just this massive crisis in democracy for the whole world. The Proud Boys, in particular, who are very well, I won't. We don't have to get into who they are, but they were very violent, and they've gone to jail. Some of them for 20 years or more for what they did on January 6th. But when they were explaining why they did what they did, they said they were obeying orders. They deeply believed that they had to obey these orders. They had to obey. They had to be compliant. That gets hammered into the human brain from 5 years old on. You must obey powerful adults and authorities. The book that came out of this is called The Perils of Obedience. And we have not applied that lesson from the 1960s. It's incredible. I write about one of my chapters, as you know, is on this
Mhm.
research. I write about all those different researchers in my book, actually. If people want more of the, I mean, you and I are just talking. If they really want the science and they want to learn about it and they want to learn how to apply it, it's in the Bullied brain.
Yeah, but look at Sinead O'Connor that died recently. She was demonized because she spoke out and because she was different to the rest of us. She actually used her voice in every way through her music, through her writing. She would do editorials. Just incredible that we look at people like that and say, oh, you're mad or you're on a rant, instead of going, well, maybe we need to listen to those people.
It's very true. It's like, I think of her as kind of a whistleblower.
Yeah,
And in society, like, I mean, she was a whistleblower in the Catholic Church long before it's
it
just
ever came out.
so
Yeah.
common knowledge that the Catholic Church really has a very challenging history. And I would love to see them become leaders in creating a new future for that congregation and that belief system and so on, because they do have a terrible track record of highly abusive practices. It's other places too. But yeah, the Sinead O'Connor, she was ahead of her time and she was very
So far
hopeful.
ahead.
Yeah.
So
And
far ahead.
people do suffer when they speak up. That's why we obey. We're so afraid of speaking
Yeah.
up. We're afraid to save ourselves and our it's part of this fearful way in which we live.
Yeah. And I've been talking to loads of people over the last few months with the podcasts, with another thing I'm doing. The amount of people who are sick, suicidal ideation, and who'd say, I wish I never started this. It's just so soul destroying. But
You know
if
what?
we don't, then who?
And you know what, Anita? I would love for everyone, if they're going to take one takeaway from this, our conversation today, soul destroying, yes. But also, what it really is brain destroying.
Hmm.
It destroys your brain when you believe in something. And I mean, you and I have personally gone through this. So both of us, we went into the world with a belief system in place. And, we can call it a fairy tale belief system if we want. I believed that the law was designed for justice for everyone, that it was a fair and equitable and caring system, and that it did the right thing. And I especially believe that it protected children when they were being abused. I learned that's not true in Canada where I live. I believe that the government, in its best form, I mean, sure, there's going to be an outlier here or there who's maybe corrupt, but in general, the government, the Ministry of Education, the representative of children and youth, the Commissioner for Teacher Regulation, who stops abusive teachers. I believed like a Catholic person would believe in the Catholic Church. These were my gods. I believed in the school that I worked at and the administrators. I worked with these people every day. I thought they cared about children's safety as the number one priority. I learned all of that was false. It was all a fairy tale. And the key is, if you're going to fight, and you and I both chose to fight, if you're going to fight, you got to know the facts. It's hard work. You have to be consistent. You have to believe that you're going to succeed, because that's the only way you'll put in the deliberate practice required to fight. And it's going to be hard on you, but it's also going to be massively empowering. You are going to feel connected to a community that you create that is different from the one that you sort of walked into with all your belief system and your fairy tales in place. You're replacing that fake community, the workplace or the school or whatever, the government and the law. You're replacing it and saying, no, I'm going to create something better. I'm going to change legislation. I'm going to demand that government make the changes required for women's safety in the home, like etc. So, I mean, people, I think they get kind of almost too bound and connected to the trauma. I mean, see yourself as a warrior. You see yourself as a whistleblower. Get up on your soapbox. Fight for what you believe to be healthy and good and true, and stop feeling like it's a trauma. It's not. Being disempowered is a trauma. Submitting to abuse, obeying people that are unhealthy and destructive, all of those things are traumatic. Fighting for what you believe to be good community and care and health and positive change, that's empowering.
Mm.
But you know what I
Well,
like?
when we started out, Jen, you're on your own, you're isolated, you feel so alone, you don't know anyone else out there. And then all of a sudden, there's this huge community around you. For anyone that's listening and that has ever been abused, there is huge community out there. You just need to know where to tap in. And the Femcast, the Working Together with Bullied 2 movement, and Better Working Lives for All. There's so many communities out there that will help. And it's like just wrap your arms around you and help you. And sometimes when you can't, you don't have the words for it, they'll voice it for you and say, this is what's happening. And it's so good to have those people with you. And like everything we talk about, Jen, we always say it takes a village. And it really does. Community is everything.
And from a brain point of view, um, we were talking about research with animals. Here's another research study with human creatures, human animals. And this is I don't know if we've talked about it in the past, Anita, but it was the Romanian babies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
It's
what
actually on
happened?
last week's episode.
Yes, okay,
Yeah.
because I want to circle back to something you said that people don't know about or they forget about. And again, it's a Maslow hierarchy mistake that's made. We believe that if we gave those Romanian orphans shelter and food, they would grow up and be fine. But they actually needed community. They needed
Yeah.
connection. The brain does not develop properly or healthily without communication and care and love and community. So you look at these people that grow up and become highly violent, and they hurt the people they're close to, and they act in these completely unregulated destructive ways. Chances are very good, if we could look back at how what the conditions were when they were raised, you would not find connection, community, healthy home, loving caring parents, opportunities. You would find chaos, and that's what creates someone. So if we look at them, upstream, and say, you're a bad person, we're going to now put you in prison and you're going to pay for your sins. It's a very kind of old fashioned model. We're going to punish you. We're not looking downstream at how did you and that's science, right? Science is going to look back and go, let's research how you became like that. And it's not like we need to do that. We already have extensive research that tells us if you raise a child in an abusive, stress-filled, mentally ill, incarcerated, substance abuse, violent place, they are going to repeat those learned behaviors. They can't actually help it unless their society sends them to a school every day where the teacher goes, okay, we need to assess how everybody's, what is your home situation? Are you all safe? Are you getting enough food? What can we do to help your family? Well, your parents need education or support or stress relief or whatever. Like, if we want kids to grow up to not be like that, we have to start downstream and make sure they're in healthy families. But we're not doing any of the things that those families need to do that.
Families or the children to help them flourish.
Like,
Jen, why do you think it is that it's more men commit violence than women? If they've both grown up in the same household, and statistically it is more men. And I get that men are sick and tired of hearing about all men. It's not all men, and we don't believe it's all men, firstly. Nobody believes it's all men, but it is a huge statistic. But the men have the power to change this. They're the ones that are going to be the change if they come along with us and be our allies and help keep women safe. But in all your research and in the animal world, and going back to the elephants, and it was the male teenage elephants that were doing the bullying. How is it that it is men that
Well,
admit more violence?
yeah. If you look at society again, let's take a look at there's a congressman in America who's written a book about the new masculinity, for example. And he's a big supporter of Donald Trump, the former president. And he talks about Andrew Tate. And Andrew Tate, I don't know if your listeners have
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's use Andrew Tate as our example. He correlates physical prowess and fitness with money, having all these fancy cars, and misogyny. Treating women objectifying women, talking about them as if they must be made subservient to men. They are to be used for sex trafficking type things, or you make them think that you love them, you bring them in, and then you use them to make money off them. They're just bodies, they're sexualized bodies. Well, Andrew Tate's very, very influential with our young men. So, first of all, the fact that that kind of stuff is allowed on the internet and can affect young men and scramble their brains is amazing to me. Like the fact that that's not illegal is amazing to me. Secondly, Josh Hawley in his new masculinity book that's just come out, he condemns Andrew Tate from sort of a moral point of view and says this is terrible. But he doesn't condemn Donald Trump because Donald Trump has a huge amount of power. So he's happy, and this is an animal world phenomenon you'll see. Josh Hawley's okay putting down a lesser being that doesn't have power. He'll attack another younger male and say that this younger male is bad, or he'll bully him publicly. He's in the book, he's a social pariah, he's a terrible person. But when it comes to the higher up, the more dominant male, he appease them to participate in sexual acts with him. So objectification, sexualization of women. And he has very famously said, he's caught on tape saying, and this is being documented, he's even admitted to it. He tries to get away from it, but he actually admitted to it, that really with his stature, his money, again, think Andrew Tate, his stature, his power, his money, his prowess, he has the right to grab women by the pussy. It's on the record. That's our former president. And he was elected with everybody knowing this. So it's pretty amazing because he's elected by people who say they have strong values. He's elected by people who say they are Christians, people who say, women, like they all voted for him. They brought him in to be the leader of the free world. So that tells me, from a scientific point of view, our young men are being raised by a completely unhealthy society. We don't have elders that are teaching the elephants how to self-regulate and giving them care and support and comfort so that they don't feel threatened and stressed out. Our young men don't get that. So our young men are growing up in a society that is completely hypocritical. On the one hand, it says you can't hurt, you can't bully, you can't behave aggressively, you can't act in an unregulated way. And by the way, we're going to encourage you to learn all of those behaviors. We're going to reward it. We're going to enable it until you become a man who acts out these types of behaviors, and you correlate them with power and powerful body and money. And women are treated misogynistically. And here's an example of this. In The Guardian, there was an article this weekend about how the Supreme Court of India, the Supreme Court of India in the 21st century is telling judges in the country, they're not prohibiting these behaviors, they're urging them. They're encouraging them to change the language they use when they are sentencing and dealing with crimes that involve women. They are urging them not to use language like Eve teasing for sexual harassment. So you can see right away, if I go into the court and I say, I was sexually harassed by this man in my workplace, and the judge says to me, oh, you were teasing him. You're like Eve. You're teasing like Eve teased Adam, and we had the fall in the garden, and we lost God. You're a temptress. You made him sexually harass you. Just like our women in Afghanistan must completely cover their bodies in extreme
Mm.
heat because they're tempting men to sexual depravity, whatever. So women are called harlot. Eve teasing, all of this language is still used in the courts in India. And I highly recommend, if people are like wondering what this manifests like, you would not believe what is done to women in India. The,
I
the,
would.
rape- the raping, the murdering, you talk about animals. It's absolutely savage. And we treat human beings as if we're anyways, it's enough to make you crazy. But that is the Supreme Court of India urging their judges to change misogynistic language. So our young boys are being raised in a society that is built still in the 21st century on misogyny. So I want to give you a really good example, a personal example. My son, I have two sons. One's 23 and one's 28. My older son, the 28-year-old, when he was in high school, so he was 15, 16, 17, he was being lambasted by two male teachers along with the other boys. They were being called, can I say bad language on the podcast?
Yeah, go for it.
They were being called, if you can imagine, two teachers, fucking pussies,
Yeah.
gross some balls, fucking soft. Like yelled in, my son in particular, yelled in his face, "You're fucking soft." It's teaching homophobia and it's teaching misogyny. How does it teach it? You're repeatedly being exposed to this violence, to this verbal abuse. Powerful elders, think elder elephants. You've got the elder elephants. They're hammering into you that there's nothing more revolting, nothing more pathetic, nothing more disgusting than a woman. And these young boys are learning from their elders that if they want to be part of the male tribe, if they want to be successful, if they want to have money like Andrew Tate, if they want to have power and prestige like Donald Trump, well, they'd better hate women and treat them like objectified, disgusting beings who are there to serve them. And they can beat them up when they want, and they can sexually abuse them when they want. And that will prove their virility. That will prove that they have masculine power. Then they will belong to the male elites. It gets hammered into them as children. It's incredible. So what did I do? I did what you and me do. I refused to let that happen with my husband by my side. We fought tooth and nail to get those teachers stopped. And it was impossible. The society enabled them, rewarded them. I mean, if it hadn't gotten exposed in the national news here in Canada, they never missed a day of work, those teachers. They were never suspended. They were protected every step of the way to allow them, I guess, to do more misogynistic, homophobic abuse to boys.
Yeah, and I bet they had in their policy and procedures book, we won't tolerate bullying in the school. Yet the teachers that are employed to protect children and keep their brains safe are the bullies.
It's the same thing in the workplace, as you know.
Yeah.
Policy and procedure manuals sit on the shelf gathering dust. They don't actually get applied to anything.
No, until you have a grievance, and then it's like they're all scattering. We need to go back to the school again and education. If we have all this science, what are politicians and government afraid of? We have the science. We've pumped a lot of money, people's time. The scientists, they're not cheap. A lot of money would have went into it, a lot of time, the experiments, and yet nothing has changed. I don't know what it is. Here, maybe they're afraid we're a small country and they're afraid to lose voters. I don't know. We had a law changed, Coco's law it's called, and it's like the distribution of intimate photographs without consent is now against the law. People, I think there's 50 odd cases coming up, and 7 people have been jailed already, and it's growing. So no more can people be blackmailed and harassed that way. It's also to keep children safe online with bullying, because too many of our children were dying by suicide. Now, Women's Aid is around since the 70s. they have all the science, they have all the statistics, yet laws aren't changing quick enough, or we're still not protected in the home. We have a lot of femicide and then murder suicide here, where their last act of violence is actually on themselves. And in Australia recently, like I'm watching what's happening there. 37 women, 38 women dead this year already. Last week, like an 11-week-old baby with her mother. It's just so sad, and I don't know why governments are afraid to challenge it, to teach it in schools, to stop this, because all of this is preventable. Like we say in every episode, all the femicides are preventable. The children dying are all preventable.
Yeah, I mean, let's just look at the statistic and government inertia. Let's look at the statistic that in the United States, which is a massive country, from 2000 to 2018, youth suicide, that's 10-year-olds to 24-year-olds, increased 57%. So, do we have a problem with education in the free world? I think so. Do we have a problem with just absolute lack of regulation and controls on the internet? Absolutely. Do parents put their children in front of screens at an early age and think that their child will somehow self destruct if they don't have a telephone in their hand early because the parent is obsessed with the phone, staring at the phone, doesn't have time to talk to the child or speak about the world to the child or teach them language or connection? It's madness. My husband works for emergency preparedness for the
What's
government.
that?
They deal with he works for the government, so it's about dealing with floods, dealing with fires. Like in British Columbia, where we live, there's a huge issue right now with forest fires. So he's in charge of all those kinds of things. And when COVID happened, the health ministry in Canada was dealing with all of the health side of it. His emergency preparedness department, they were responsible for changing all the laws to do with COVID. So masks have to be worn. Trucks can absolutely be bringing groceries at 6 o'clock in the morning, even though they're not normally allowed to make noise in a neighborhood. We have a food shortage problem. This is going to change. He was changing laws faster than every single day to completely change everything because of COVID. And you're telling me it takes 50 years to change a law to protect a woman from being beaten up in her home? That's government. If the government is not changing the laws, it's because they don't want to. So you have to ask yourself questions around why. I mean, would you vote for a government? Would you vote for a politician who came out and said, you know what? We've got 30 years of peer reviewed, replicated, extensive neuroscientific research that says we really need to learn as much as we can about the brain because the brain is what shapes every single thing we do, say. Like, we need healthy brains. We want to make Ireland a country of super healthy brains. Healthy brains don't beat each other up. They don't commit okay, I sound judgmental. I was going to say they don't commit suicide, but I don't mean that as a moral judgment. I mean that as a medical health judgment. If you are feeling suicidal, it's because you have a big distortion happening in your brain, and there's medical help for that. There's all kinds of knowledge about how to get you better, but we don't even treat suicide in the 21st century as if it's a medical crisis. Violence, suicide, killing an 11-year-old baby, these are massively
11
unnatural
week.
acts. 11-week-old baby.
Yeah.
It's very unhealthy. Imagine if you saw an animal population behaving like this. All of the studies would be happening. The zoologists they'd all have their laboratory equipment working double time on figuring out what's going on. But we don't do it. We don't apply science to human populations. I would vote for a politician that said to me, I'm going to address eating disorders, prison system. I'm going to make everything about rehabilitating brains. I'm going to get women safe in their home and have a place for them to go to report that the husband needs rehab because he's acting in aggressive, violent ways. It's not who he really is. He's coming from extreme trauma in his upbringing. We got to get him better. It's going to take 6 months, but absolutely worth it. Like, why
Yeah.
don't we do these things?
Absolutely. If we had a government that would just, like, I believe here anyway, we had the cervical smear scandal, where they outsourced our smear tests, and a lot of the women have died, and ton more are terminally ill. I don't think that'd happen if it was a prostate problem. I think we'd have one or two and then it'd be dealt with and addressed. And they promised that they wouldn't drag the women through court, and women are dying and they're still dragging them through court and making them fight. I think it's absolutely disgusting and horrendous to do that to a dying woman when our time is precious and she should be spending it with her children, her parents, her siblings, her husband. And we still keep voting them in. Well, I don't, but somebody is. And unless they're not prepared to change. We're still the same education system, technology, everything has moved on, but our education system is still the same. We're getting the same results. 50 years later, we're still getting women dying in their homes. We're inundated with emails from people with suicidal ideation on antidepressant, mental health problems, breakdowns, marriage breakups, all because of workplace bullying. And then you have the children that are dying by suicide, that are getting left behind because we're not dealing with the problem. But if we saw it in the animal kingdom, we'd be disgusted and we'd probably euthanize those animals.
It's not a hard fix. It really isn't. I mean, if we stopped the outdated moral framework in which some people are bad and some people are good, some people are worth proper medical care, some people aren't. Some people get all the money, some people get nothing, even though they work two jobs. If we just stop the moral framework that people vote these people in because they want to maintain status quo, and we used a scientific framework, we would change everything.
Why are they
Science.
afraid of it? What is the fear? Aside from the pharmaceutical companies getting all the money from all the drugs.
Well, I mean, think how much a government would save if they invested in early childhood education, care for parents, support for families. They invested in children. So they made a state of the art education system, and they really invested in teachers being highly educated and properly paid and completely supported by the society, and like way more teachers so that kids, you didn't have 30 kids in a class and one poor individual trying to manage everything. If the government invested there and they used a scientific model that really foregrounded the importance of, we call it psychological safety, but it's really brain safety. If we created schools and homes where children had brain safety, not and physical safety, obviously, we would save money 20 years later on prisons, mental health, non-productivity, being on the welfare system, alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence, divorce, all of those things that cost the system, cost us taxpayers grotesque amounts of money. And it's usually a small number of the population. And they are not bad people. They are the people that had the most harm done to them growing up. They grew up in highly destructive home lives or in schools or in sports or whatever. They've been really hurt, not in a moral sense. They've been physically and mentally damaged. Their brains have been damaged. It can be seen on a brain scan. They cost the system gazillions of dollars, and we spend all our time and resources addressing the harm that these people do. They commit crimes. They kill their child. They kill their wife. They're a disaster. That's where all the money goes. Why don't we invest downstream in ensuring that those people aren't destroyed as children and then become highly dysfunctional adults?
That's a big job now we have to do, Jen.
It wouldn't be so hard. It wouldn't be so hard to. Is it really that hard in human populations to ensure that kids are being raised in healthy homes? We teach kids in the education system, look, if you're going to have a child, here's the reality of it. Here's what it means. Here's the contract you need to sign. Here is, and if you need help, and lots of us do, we have things we can't even anticipate that we're going to need help with. Here's the resources, and here's the societal community, as you say, in the village. Here's what the village is going to do.
They shame. Yeah, it's like we punish the poor and we shame them if they need help. Instead of I think that's so courageous to go and say, I'm struggling and I need help. that's the most courageous thing a person can do, I think. Because we've been brought up like, don't ask for help, do it on your own. And I did it myself for years. And it's the most courageous thing a human can do is to actually say, I need help. 100% of the time, people love helping. They actually love helping and they love being asked. I learned that years ago in business. We'd be afraid to ask. And then you learn really quickly from the networking. People love being asked.
Yeah.
I think it's stigma, and we have to lift the stigma of helping them.
It's like, the stigma around mental health. We're so old fashioned and outdated, which is really, it's getting more and more out of control because while we allow technology to advance at such a rapid pace, we keep these outdated institutions in place that can't cope with technology. They don't, our governments aren't even prepared for AI. They're not regulating social media. They're allowing it to poison children's brains. Like, it's incredible. So they don't keep up with any of that. And then they keep these rickety old fashioned, concepts around like, oh, somehow mental health is something to be ashamed of. Well, even the language, let's call it brain health. I'm not ashamed to have a heart problem. Why would I be ashamed to have a brain problem? And why wouldn't I go and get professional help with my brain problem? Like,
Yeah.
we people when they have suicidal ideation as if it's a character flaw. Like, really? You wouldn't feel that way if you needed an appendicitis. If you needed your appendix out,
Yeah.
you feel like you had to cower away and hide and write a note about it. You'd go right to emergency. That's exactly what you should do when you have suicidal ideation. Go into emergency and say, look, I need your top neuroscientist here. I'd love to have an EEG of my brain or an MRI. My brain is malfunctioning. Not sure why, but it's making me feel something that's really strange and destructive behavior.
Well, I would say to anyone here, good luck getting that in Ireland. Even like our most famous people can't access mental health resources here, which is very, very sad. But we wouldn't have them in the first place if we looked at, again, downstream, look at the children coming up along. We wouldn't have these mental health problems. We'd have some. You're not going to get rid of everything. But if we looked at it and helped them, looked at them holistically in school and worked on the brain safety throughout school, in the colleges, the universities, in the workplace, going into relationships, and everybody deserves to feel safe, and we should have brain safety everywhere.
Well, Anita, I don't think we've talked about it. We should, save this for another episode, but we should talk about the adolescent brain, which is the brain most at risk. But we don't teach teenagers anything about their brains, and we don't teach their parents or their teachers anything about their brain development. They're undergoing such rapid brain development from 13 to 24, 25 that they are 3 times more at risk of dying. So it is a massive safety issue, but we still don't teach them anything about their brain changes and how to manage and keep their brains healthy and safe during those dangerous years.
Well, can we do that then on the next episode, Jen? We'll do the adolescent brain.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much. And on the next episode, then we'll be talking about the adolescent brain and the science behind that. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us on the Femcast. We invite you now to stay connected with us by hitting the subscribe buttons below and follow us across our social media channels at the Femcast. We value your feedback and reviews. By sharing ideas, insights and experiences, we can all learn, grow and make a meaningful difference. We also want to remind you that we care about your well-being. If any topics discussed on today's episode have raised concerns or you need support, please visit our website www.thefemcast.com for helpful resources and phone numbers. Thank you for being part of the Femcast.